Over the past 3 weeks, anti-racism protests spread following the death of George Floyd. The movement has spread to more than 2,000 U.S. cities and towns in all 50 states, leading to calls to take down historic statues and defund or even abolish police departments. In Atlanta, Georgia, dozens were arrested as protesters took to the streets after a 27-year-old black man, Rayshard Brooks, was shot and killed by a white police officer on June 12th. Actually, will the movement bring lasting change? And amid all this, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo blasted the Chinese government for, quote, obscene propaganda in the wake of Floyd's killing. What's that all about? In our Beijing CNY studio, we're joined by current affairs commentator Einar Tangen. In Tianjin, via Skype, we're joined by Professor Huang Haitao. He's an associate professor with the Zhou Enlai School of Government and a research fellow at the Center for Human Rights Studies at China's Nankai University. Welcome, both of you, especially Haitao, our new friend here. I want to ask the first question to both of you. We've seen Black Lives Matter protests turn violent in the U.S. and across Europe. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson condemned, quote-unquote, racist thuggery after right-wing protesters clashed with anti-racism activists and police in London last Saturday. Where do we draw the line between expressing our views peacefully and breaking the law and order? Will the violence escalate? Haitao, why don't you start first?
Okay, thank you, Wang Guan. I think the bottom line is there should be no tolerance to any kind of violence. I think violence is not the right way to express your idea. Violence is only the thing that can only invoke violence. So I don't think there is a big chance for the escalation of violence. We can see the development of the protests in United States. For the first week, there were some people are getting shocked and getting angry. So some radicals resort to violence. But for the past 2 weeks, and we see most of the demonstrators, they were behaving themselves. And I think most of the protests were conducted peacefully. So we can apply this perspective to analyze other kind of protests.
Well, Einar, what do you think? Where's the line between protests and peaceful protests and violent protests?
Well, that's the hypocrisy of it. If you're protesting that somebody was victimized by the system, creating more innocent victims is not going to get your point across. It simply makes you a hypocrite. You say, I've been victimized, so I'm going to victimize somebody else. Sounds a lot like Donald Trump. So in this particular case, you don't want the violence out there. It does not help your message. But to the extent that Black Lives Matter is about an issue that is much more long-standing, it's about inequality, both in race and economics in the United States. And to that extent, yes, there needs to be peaceful protests that point out that the United States cannot continue on this basis. When you have 90% of the people over a 30-year period experiencing no appreciable gain in the real income, despite all this boasts about GDP going up, you're bound to have people start questioning the system. For Donald Trump, it worked the first time in 2016. He convinced people he was the people's champion and that he was going to take care of things. Today, we see that he's not been able to do that, and there are now real questions. But settling them peacefully is the only way. It was Martin Luther King's way. It was Gandhi's way. And it is the way of which you create meaningful societies.
Well, Einar, what's shocking is that we're still seeing incidents of African Americans killed by white police officers in the U.S. Just 4 days ago in Atlanta, in fact. That's pretty shocking, isn't it, given the nationwide protests?
Yeah, but you know, what you have here is fear and hatred growing on both sides. I was a prosecutor, I was a defense attorney. I saw this firsthand, the police culture. It's not good. It's very macho. It's very much us versus them, and not just minorities. The police really believe that they are, the underdogs of society, that they're treated poorly, not respected. They're, in essence, the human trash collectors for society. And there's a tremendous amount of resentment and fear. So when they go on the street, they take this mentality with them. In good police force, you will have somebody who takes the leadership role and changes the culture. But in police forces that are failing, They don't do that, and as a result, you get these kinds of incidents.
It's really unfortunate. Haitao in Tianjin, according to New York Times, early demographic data shows a significant presence of white protesters. Why are more people joining the protests? I mean, in terms of geographic and demographic scale, how do you think are the George Floyd's protests different from previous movements?
Yes, I want to also share another data with you that there was a survey conducted by the University of Maryland. The survey shows that half of the protesters in Washington, D.C., New York, and London, they are under the age of 30. I think now there is a kind of younger people, they want to express their ideas on the injustice. So I think we can also apply this perspective for why so many white people they join the protest, because to safeguard everybody's safety is a universal and is the common sense, is the conventional wisdom. And I think, but I'm a little bit pessimistic about how different of this movement, because we got a lot of experience of the previous protests on civil rights and on the rights of the African American people. We know that people want to promote kind of police reform in the United States, but we don't see any big or fundamental change of the there is a kind of institutional or systematic racism in the United States.
Einar, what do you think? We have Michael Brown's death, Trayvon Martin. During the Obama era, we've seen this time around the cities seeking a quote-unquote seismic shift in police department. Will the 2020 protests be different?
No, I'm afraid that they won't, and for this reason, that they're looking to change the police departments as if it's one point, and changing that will change the underlying problems of society. The truth is, the United States does not take care of the poor. There is no universal health care system. There is no good safety net that's making sure the educational resources that are there to try to lift people out of poverty and make them useful in society are not working. So, it's fine to, focus your anger on one point, but unless you change the system, you're going to get no good results.
Haitao, how do you look at the messages, the demand from this round of movements and the protesters? One demand of them is to defund, even abolish police departments. Do you think that makes any sense?
I don't think it makes any sense, because I think it's moving a wrong direction of the protest. I think the police officer actually in every country should have its own role in the community. So to abolish the police officer is just to it's not the target, and the target should be the racism.
And what about meaningful progress, meaningful change in the U.S.? You've been following this. We've talked about this actually last year when we were both in New York City about race relations in the U.S. What do you think?
Oh, yes. I think this is quite an important problem in the United States. I think the race problem is an inherited and deeply embedded problem in the U.S. society. And from my understanding, it's very hard to find a resolution, but maybe they can find something or some place for the balance between different claims, and but I'm a little bit pessimistic for the final or ultimate resolution for the racism.
But guess what? China is once again caught in the debate deriving from the protests from the death of George Floyd. The U.S. is describing the upcoming potential talks with China as some of them are unenthusiastic about it. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tweeted recently that the Chinese Communist Party's callous attempts to exploit George Floyd's tragic death for its own political gain will fail. During the best of times, Beijing ruthlessly imposes communism. Amid the most difficult challenges, the United States secures freedom. Wow. Einar, your thoughts?
Well, I really don't take Pompeo that seriously. I mean, he is dangerous. There's no question about that. But, you know, both he and the administration he works for looks like they're tanking badly if you start looking at the politics, the economics, and the history of elections. It's not really possible for Donald Trump to resurrect themselves. And Pompeo, although he might not disappear politically, will be not the figure he is. He will not be heading up the State Department. At least that is my hope. I mean, what it stems out of is the hypocrisy that China pointed out, that when China was trying to very peacefully, not China, was allowing Hong Kong to try to deal with the riots that were happening there. It was all about freedom and free expression, and don't do anything, and police brutality. But when the U.S. has a justified issue with racism that's systemic, then all of a sudden putting down protesters, beating them, killing young black men somehow becomes justified. This is just simply projection. He wants to take all of the criticisms that should be leveled at the United States and instead turn them around. It's a classic Trump move. You always accuse those of doing what you intend to do.
That is indeed a double standard in the opinion of many. Haitao, what do you think? Do you agree that China is exploiting George Floyd's death for its own political gain, as Mike Pompeo just said?
No, I don't think that China is exploiting the incidents now happening in the United States. And I think China always want to develop quite stable and quite positive bilateral relations with the United States. Now the problem, and the major problem, is the United States don't want to do that. I think that is the major problem now.
And there are talks about the potential meeting in Hawaii, in Honolulu, between the top diplomats on both sides. How hopeful are you about the meeting and its positive outcomes for both of you? Why did you start first, Haitao?
I think to meet with each other is a good choice, because in the Obama administration, and we got some tracks to meet and to talk. But in this administration, there are some problems. So both of them to meet each other can create some chance for the further development of the bilateral relations.
Einar, we'll have about 35 seconds. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so you have to see this in context. What you have is Pompeo and Trump talking about the D11, the Democratic 11 countries, which is in essence a stalking horse for blaming China for all of the world's ills. So at this point, meeting is great, but I think in this particular case, it's just a photo op for Pompeo to say, I tried, while he demonizes China.
All right, thanks to my guests, Einar Tangen and Professor Huang Haitao from Nankai University. That is this edition of The Point. As always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the CGTN app to watch our show, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thank you for watching.